Don't open it again. An original audiobook by Mindshift Library. Ethan Cole woke at 3:17 a.m. Not approximately. Not 3:16 or 3:18. The clock on his nightstand, a plain black rectangle he had owned for years, read 3:17 every single time, as if the hour itself had decided to visit and would not be early or late. He had been waking at that time for 19 nights. Before the 19th night, he had been a man who slept. Not well, he had never slept well, not since the divorce, not since the quiet unraveling of a marriage he had believed was steady. But sleep had come, eventually, the way it does for people who have stopped expecting much from it. He would lie down, review the next day's models the way other men count sheep, and let the numbers carry him under. That had been his life, a man carried under by numbers. Now the numbers no longer worked. Now there was a knock in the hour that had no right to knock. On the first few, he had blamed work. Ethan was 43, an actuary by training and a risk analyst by trade, the kind of man who measured uncertainty for a living and prided himself on not believing in things he could not model. Stress woke people. That was ordinary. That was explainable. A deadline, a difficult client, the slow erosion of a sleep schedule that had been fragile since his divorce. Any of these could account for a restless hour. He had told himself this with the calm authority of a man who trusted numbers over feelings. But the explanations had started failing. On the 9th night, he had gotten out of bed to get water, and on the way back he had heard a sound from the hallway. A door opening. Not the front door that was locked, chained, unchanged. The sound came from the far end of the corridor where the narrow storage door stood. A soft click, then a slow exhale of air, as if the door had been holding its breath all day and had finally let it go. Ethan had stood in the dark and listened. The sound did not repeat. By morning he had convinced himself it was the building's old plumbing, or a draft, or the half-remembered noise of a dream. He was good at convincing himself of the reasonable thing. It was, perhaps, the only skill his profession had given him that transferred cleanly to his personal life. By the 14th night, he no longer believed that. He had begun against his nature to keep a log. Not the spiral notebook yet, just notes in his phone, terse and doubting. *3:17 again. Click from hallway. Nothing there in morning. The entries accumulated like evidence in a case he was not yet willing to call a case. Ethan Cole, who had built a career on distinguishing signal from noise, was beginning to suspect that the noise in his hallway was, in fact, signal. Tonight, the 19th night, he did not get up for water. He lay with his eyes open and counted the seconds until the click came. It arrived at 3:17, exactly as the clock confirmed, and then a second sound followed. Not the door opening, but the door settling, the way a door settles when something on the other side has just stepped away from it. Ethan threw back the blanket. He moved through his apartment in the dark because he knew the layout by heart. He had lived here for 11 months. The apartment had belonged to his older brother, Adrian, who had died unexpectedly in this very building, and Ethan had inherited it the way you inherit a closed book, with the contents still inside, unexplained, and with the unsettling sense that the book had been waiting for the right reader. The corridor ran from the bedroom past the bathroom to the far wall. At its end, the storage door. During the day it was a shallow closet, a few shelves, a vacuum, a box of Adrian's things Ethan had not yet sorted, a smell of dust and old carpet. A door so ordinary it had taken him weeks to notice it at all. Now at 3:17 the door stood an inch open. Ethan had not opened it. He reached out, the brass knob was cool, he pulled. And the closet was gone. What waited beyond the door was not a closet. It was a corridor. It stretched in the wrong direction, past the wall where the closet should have ended, into a space that had no right to exist inside a 9th-floor apartment. The light came from somewhere ahead, a warm, narrow glow, the color of a hallway lamp left on for someone who is late. The air that drifted out was not the stale dust of storage. It was warmer, Faintly familiar, the way the air in a place you have visited in a dream still smells of that place when you wake. For a long moment, Ethan simply looked. The part of his mind that built models for a living was screaming that this was impossible, that a corridor could not open inside a wall, that he was asleep or unwell or both. But the other part, the part that had always trusted what his eyes reported over what his theories predicted, was already stepping forward, because the corridor was their asterisk, and real and waiting. And the only honest response to a thing that is actually happening is to go and see it. Ethan did not step through it first. He stood in the threshold of his own hallway and looked at a hallway that should not have been there. The corridor was dim but not dark. The warm light ahead gave everything a soft amber edge, the color of a hotel hallway at midnight, or a hospital, or any place where people wait for news. The carpet under his bare feet was thicker than his own, newer, and it muffled his steps the way deep carpet does. The walls were beige like his, but the pictures were different. Where his hallway held nothing, this one held a small framed print of a lake, the kind of generic calm landscape people buy at a furniture store. Adrian had liked those. Ethan had always found them bland. Seeing one here in a corridor that should not exist landed with a small, uncanny weight. The door knew Adrian's taste. Then curiosity, the trait that had made him a good analyst and a difficult brother, carried him forward. The corridor was perhaps 30 feet long. Its walls were the same beige as his own, but the baseboards were newer, the carpet a slightly different shade. At the far end, a doorway opened onto a room lit by the yellow glow. Ethan stepped through it and stopped. It was his living room. Not exactly. The furniture was arranged differently. The sofa faced the window instead of the wall, and there was a chair by the reading lamp that he did not own. But the window was his window. The view of the parking lot and the street lamp was his view. The small crack in the upper left pane, the one he kept meaning to report to the building manager, was there. Even the dent in the floorboard near the radiator, where a previous tenant had dropped something heavy, was in the same place. This was his apartment. From another time. On the sofa sat a man with his back to Ethan. The man's hair was gray at the temples, his shoulders narrower than Ethan's, his posture the posture of someone waiting for a phone call that decides everything. He was older than Ethan by perhaps 15 years. He held a coffee mug Ethan recognized. It had belonged to Adrian, the chipped blue one with the faded anchor on the side, the one Ethan had found in the kitchen cupboard and not known whether to keep or throw away. The man said without turning, "You're later than usual." Ethan did not answer. He could not. The man on the sofa was, he understood with a slow, cold certainty, himself, an older version, a future Ethan, if such a thing could be, sitting in a living room that was and was not his own. The older Ethan set the mug down and finally turned. His face was Ethan's face, weathered. There were lines around the eyes that Ethan's face did not yet have, and a stillness in the gaze that Ethan recognized from photographs of his father, the look of a man who has made a decision and is living inside the consequences whether he likes them or not. "You keep coming back," the older man said. "That's the mistake." Then the warm light folded inward, the way a photograph curls when you close the book, and Ethan was standing in his own hallway again, the storage door an inch open, the closet dark and ordinary behind it. He closed the door. His hand was steady. He was proud of that later, that his hand had been steady, that he had not cried out or rushed or done any of the things the situation might have justified. The steadiness was its own kind of terror. It meant some part of him had already accepted that the impossible was now part of the routine. He went back to bed and did not sleep. He lay with his eyes open and watched the clock tick toward a normal hour, and for the first time in his adult life, he understood what people meant when they said a thing had changed them. Not that the thing was huge, but that the world had revealed a seam, and once seen, the seam did not unsee. By the 22nd night, Ethan had stopped trying to explain the corridor away. He had begun, instead, to document it. He was an analyst. Documentation was what he did when the world refused to behave. He bought a cheap voice recorder and a spiral notebook, and after each 317 occurrence he sat at his kitchen table, the real one, in the real apartment, and wrote down what he had seen. The rules emerged slowly, the way a pattern emerges from enough data points. Rule 1. The door changed only at 3:17 a.m. He tested this once at 3:16 and once at 3:18, standing in the hallway with his hand on the knob. Nothing. The closet stayed a closet. At 3:17 exactly the change came, as if the hour itself turned a key. Rule 2. The phenomenon lasted a limited time. He had never been able to remain beyond roughly 9 minutes. At some point the warm light would fold, the corridor would close, and the closet would reassert itself. He had timed it crudely with his phone, 8 minutes 40 seconds on the longest visit, 6 minutes 12 on the shortest. The duration was not fixed, but it was never long. Rule 3. He could not choose what he saw. The corridor presented its own sequence. Some nights he arrived in the living room with the older self. Other nights the corridor led him to the kitchen, or the bedroom, or a version of the apartment he did not recognize at all. He did not control the destination. The door did. Rule 4, and this was the one that unsettled him most, what he saw was not a clean recording. It was affected by him. On a night when he was angry, he had had a hostile email from his supervisor that evening. The scenes he witnessed were angrier, sharper, the voices louder. On a night when he was tired and sad, the scenes were subdued, mournful. The corridor seemed to render not only the apartment but his interpretation of it. Memory, fear, and guilt, he wrote in the notebook, are part of the image. He did not yet understand what that meant. He only knew that the door was not a window. It was more like a mirror that showed a room. Some mornings he found traces that the night had happened, not in the apartment, which stayed ordinary, but in himself. A phrase he did not remember thinking would surface at the stove. A fact about the building's layout he had not known, recalled as if remembered. Once, he caught himself humming a tune Adrian had liked, a wordless melody from their childhood, and stood in the kitchen with his hand frozen on the kettle, unnerved by the precision of the memory he had not supplied. The door, it seemed, did not only show him the other apartment. It left something of it in him, which was, he noted in the notebook with a dryness he did not feel, exactly the kind of detail that made a man sound unwell when he described it to his friend. He also noticed objects crossing between the two realities. Once, he found on the kitchen counter a key he did not own, a small brass key with a blue tag. The next morning it was gone. Another night he left his own pen on the hallway shelf before opening the door. When he returned, the pen was still there, but beside it sat a second pen, identical, that had not been there before. The objects that crossed followed a rule he could not yet name. They appeared only at the threshold, only briefly, as if the two realities permitted a small, reluctant exchange at their border, the way two countries allow a single postcard across a closed frontier. He wrote all of this down. He dated each entry. He was building, without knowing it, the case file for his own undoing, a meticulous record of a phenomenon he would later have to choose to stop believing in, the way you compile evidence against a habit you are not yet ready to quit. And there was one rule he could not write, because it was not about the door but about himself. Each night, after closing the closet, he felt a little less like the man who had inherited an apartment and a little more like a man who had been chosen by it. The corridor did not demand belief. It simply made disbelief harder. That, he would later understand, was the most dangerous thing about it, not that it showed him impossible things, but that it made him want to keep looking. Adrian Cole had been 12 years older than Ethan. He had been the brother who fixed things, the bicycle, the radiator, the silence at the dinner table after their father left. He had been the one who called every Sunday, who sent birthday cards with awkward handwriting, who had, when Ethan's marriage ended, driven 6 hours without being asked and stayed on the couch for a week, making bad jokes about the television, and doing the dishes without being told. And then, in the last 3 years of his life, Adrian had become a stranger. The calls stopped. The cards stopped. When Ethan visited, Adrian was distant, preoccupied, sometimes almost afraid, not of Ethan, but of something Ethan could not see. The estrangement had no single cause Ethan could name. It simply grew like a crack in a wall until the two brothers were standing on opposite sides of it, each waiting for the other to speak first, neither quite able to. Ethan had told himself the story simply. Adrian had pulled away. Adrian had chosen distance. Adrian, who had always been the responsible one, had at the end become unreachable, and Ethan, proud and hurt, had let him. He had not fought for the relationship the way Adrian had once fought for his bicycle tire or his silence. He had let the crack widen, and then Adrian had died, and the crack became a grave, and Ethan had buried his anger in it along with the brother. Now he was not so sure of the story. Adrian died at 41. The official record said a heart attack in this apartment at 3:17 a.m. Ethan had been told the time by the building manager who had found Adrian in the morning. The death certificate listed 3:17. So did the police report. So did the brief, bureaucratic note from the coroner. Ethan had always found the precision odd. Deaths were rarely that exact. A heart attack might be discovered at 3:17, but it did not usually strike with the punctuality of a train. But grief had not asked him to interrogate it, and he had not. He had filed the time away as one of those small administrative facts that accompany a death, like the date and the cause, and he had not thought of it again until the door began to open at exactly that hour. Now, standing in a corridor that showed him a life he had not lived, Ethan began to wonder whether Adrian had known about the door. The thought arrived the way suspicions do, quietly, then everywhere. Adrian had lived here. Adrian had died here at 3:17. If the door opened at 3:17 because something about this apartment, this hour, this place had always been different, then Adrian must have known. Adrian must have stood in this same hallway. Adrian must have seen the same corridor. And Adrian had left behind exactly one piece of writing, addressed to Ethan. It was in an envelope among Adrian's things, unsealed, undated, found weeks after the funeral in a drawer Ethan had avoided opening. The handwriting was Adrian's, the same cramped, left-slanting hand from the birthday cards. The message was short. "Whatever you see behind the door," it read, "never follow yourself." Ethan had read it a dozen times and understood none of it. Now he read it again, by the kitchen light, and felt the first cold thread of meaning. Adrian had known, and Adrian had been afraid. He set the note down beside the kettle. The handwriting, usually so controlled, had a tremor in the final word "yourself," as if Adrian had written it with the door open behind him, hurrying, aware that the hour was close. Ethan had not noticed the tremor before. He noticed it now, the way you notice, too late, that the person you were angry at had been asking for help in a language you refused to learn. On the 26th night, the corridor led Ethan to the kitchen. Not his kitchen as it was, but a version heavy with evening. The light over the stove was on. A woman sat at the table, her back to him, shoulders shaking. She was crying quietly, the way people cry when they believe they are alone and have decided that being alone with the grief is preferable to being witnessed in it. Ethan had never seen her before. He moved closer. The woman was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back loosely, wearing a sweater 2 sizes too big Adrian's, he realized. It was the same sweater in the photograph from Adrian's drawer, the gray one with the worn cuffs. She held a photograph in one hand and pressed it to her chest with the other, the way people hold evidence of a life they are not ready to lose. "I didn't know," she whispered to the empty room. "I didn't know he was scared too." Ethan did not recognize her. He filed the detail away. A woman connected to Adrian in this apartment in a time that felt like the past. He did not yet know her name, but he noted the intimacy of the scene. She wore Adrian's sweater. She wept in Adrian's kitchen. She spoke as if Adrian were the subject of a grief she had not been permitted to finish. This was not a stranger. This was someone who had loved Adrian, or been loved by him, or both, and who had been left with the kind of unanswered question that does not close on its own. There was a sound beneath her weeping, faint, that he would not place for many nights. She was humming. The same wordless melody Adrian had liked, the one Ethan would later catch himself humming at his own stove. He did not connect them yet. The door did not hand him the pattern whole. It gave him pieces, the way grief gives pieces, and trusted him to assemble them or not. Over the following nights, the kitchen scene returned in fragments. The woman was sometimes at the table, sometimes at the window, sometimes standing by the fridge with the same photograph. Once she spoke to someone Ethan could not see. "He left it for you," she said. "He said you'd understand when you stopped being angry." Ethan, listening, felt the words land like a stone. He had been angry. He still was, in some recess place, angry at Adrian for vanishing before they could mend anything, angry at the silence that had replaced his brother's Sunday calls. He began, despite himself, to look for the woman in his real life. There was no one in the building who matched. No neighbor, no visitor, no name in Adrian's phone he could connect to a 30-year-old with dark hair and a borrowed sweater. The corridor showed him a person who did not exist in his present, which meant she existed in a past he had not been part of or a future he had not reached. He wrote in the notebook, "Is she memory or warning or both?" He did not yet know that the answer would rewrite the question. He only knew that the woman at the table, weeping in Adrian's sweater, had begun to make the dead brother feel less like a closed book, and more like a book someone had torn pages from before giving it to him. Ethan's only close friend, Mark Vance, thought he was losing his mind. They had known each other since college, a friendship that had survived Ethan's divorce and Adrian's death by virtue of Mark's refusal to be impressed by either. Mark was a physics teacher, precise and skeptical, the kind of man who believed every mystery was a measurement nobody had made yet. "I'm not saying you're crazy," Mark said, over beer in a bar 2 blocks from the apartment. "I'm saying your brain is a pattern-matching machine that's currently being fed a weird input, grief, insomnia, an inherited apartment full of your dead brother's stuff, and it's doing what brains do, which is invent a story." "You weren't there," Ethan said. "I don't have to be there. I have the data. You're waking at a fixed time. Fixed time suggests a cue. Cue suggests something in the environment. Carbon monoxide, old wiring, a neighbor's device on a timer. Have you checked the building's electrical?" Ethan had not. He had, in fact, avoided investigating ordinary causes because part of him, the part that had always trusted evidence over feeling, was afraid Mark was right. If the door were explainable, it would mean Adrian's note meant nothing. And Ethan, who had spent years resenting Adrian for meaning nothing in the end, was not ready to learn that the note meant nothing too. The note was the last words his brother had left him, and even if it was a fragment of a frightened man's delusion, it was asterisk his. The only direct address Adrian had managed, the only proof that Adrian had been thinking of him at the end. So he let Mark run tests. Mark brought over a carbon monoxide detector, a thermal camera, an EMF meter that looked like a TV remote. The readings were boring. The apartment was safe. The wiring was old but not haunted. "See," Mark said, "boring. You're stressed, Ethan. You inherited a dead brother's life and you're narrating a ghost story to survive it." Ethan nodded. He did not mention that the thermal camera had, for one frame, shown a warm shape in the hallway where the storage door was, a shape that vanished when Mark looked again. He did not mention it because he was not sure it had been real, and because if he mentioned it, Mark would stay, and Ethan needed Mark to leave so he could be at the door at 3:17. The friendship had its own rule. Mark could doubt, but Ethan could not let the doubt become an intervention. Not yet. He thought about telling Mark the truth anyway, about the corridor, the older self, the brother's note, and rejected it. Mark would either try to hospitalize him or try to explain him, and neither would change what was behind the door. Some experiences, Ethan was learning, could only be carried, not shared. That night the corridor showed him Adrian again, not the older Ethan, but Adrian himself, younger, in the kitchen, hiding something in the space behind the false panel in the bathroom wall. Adrian moved quickly, guiltily, the way a person hides a thing they are ashamed of. Ethan had never known the panel existed. The next morning he checked. The panel was real. Behind it, nothing. Adrian had removed whatever he had hidden, or it had never been there in the present. False lead, he wrote, or clue. He could no longer tell the difference cleanly. The child appeared on the 31st night. Ethan entered the corridor and found himself not in a room but at the apartment's front door, looking in through it as if he were a visitor. Inside, a small boy, perhaps 5, sat on the living room floor playing with a toy truck. A woman's voice called from the kitchen, "Don't wake your uncle, uncle." The boy looked up and smiled at Ethan, or at the space where Ethan stood, and said, "Hi, Daddy." Ethan was not a father. He had no children. His marriage had ended without them, and he had, in the years since, told himself he was content with that, a clean, child-free life, no small catastrophes, no sleepless nights that were not of his own making. The lie had been comfortable. It was less comfortable now, with a 5-year-old calling him daddy in a version of his own living room. He stepped back from the threshold, heart loud in his ears, and the scene held the boy, the truck, the warm kitchen light, for the full length of the visit before it folded away. He spent the next day in a kind of frozen calm. The child was the first vision that felt like the future rather than the past, a future in which he was someone's father in this apartment, with a woman whose voice he almost recognized. It was tempting, it was tempting to believe the corridor was showing him what could be. A second chance at the family he had failed to build, the absence he had dressed up as a choice. But the rules he had written warned him. The corridor showed consequences organized around decisions, not certainties. The boy might be a possible future, shaped by his own hope, a longing he had not admitted even to Mark, rendered by the door as a small figure on a floor with a truck. Or he might be a warning, or a grief, or a memory of a life Adrian had wanted for him and he had declined. He told no one about the child, not Mark, not the notebook's colder analysis. Some truths felt too soft to write down where they could be measured. He carried the boy the way you carry a warm coal in your palm, wanting to keep it, afraid to close your hand. That evening he looked up Adrian's will. Adrian had left the apartment to Ethan, and separately, a small trust fund to any child of Ethan's who should later appear. Ethan had read that clause at the lawyer's office and thought it a sentimental error, the kind of thing people write when they are dying and sentimental and not thinking clearly. Now he wondered whether Adrian had known something, whether the clause was a message, or a hope, or both. Adrian, who had seen branches, might have seen this one too, a nephew for Ethan, a boy for the brother who had none. It was a strange, tender thought, and Ethan let it sit without examining it too closely, the way you let a bruise heal by not pressing on it. He did not yet understand that the child was the key to the twist, and that the twist would cost him the simplest version of the story he had been telling himself. The building manager, a woman named Mrs. Acaffer, had lived on the 3rd floor for 30 years. Ethan went to see her because he was running out of explanations that did not involve the word impossible, and because Mrs. Acaffer, he had noticed everything. She knew which tenants recycled and which did not. She knew the building's moods, the way it groaned in winter, the way the mail slot rattled before rain. "Your brother," she said when he mentioned Adrian. "Quiet man, polite, paid on time, but the last year restless, up at all hours. I heard him in the hallway some nights, talking, not to anyone I could see." "Talking to whom?" She shrugged, the practiced shrug of a person who has learned that the truth is often less useful than a shrug. "Himself, maybe, or the door. There's a door at the end of his corridor, you know, storage. He was always fiddling with it, had a locksmith out once, paid cash." Ethan felt the floor shift. Adrian had modified the storage door. That fit a false lead he had considered, that Adrian had built something, a mechanism, a trick. But Mrs. Acaffer's next words ruled that out. After he passed, I asked the locksmith what he'd done. Man said he didn't install anything. He removed something. Said there was a latch on the inside of that door that didn't belong to the building's original hardware. Your brother paid him to take it off and seal the frame. A latch on the inside. Something Adrian had found and removed and sealed, and then died at 3:17 anyway. Did he ever say why? Ethan asked. Mrs. Acaffer looked at him with the flat pity of someone who has watched many tenants come and go, and who has decided that most of what people do is a kind of grief they cannot name. He said he'd seen enough. He said some doors should stay ordinary. Then he gave me that look people give when they've decided not to explain, and he went back upstairs. Ethan thanked her and walked home through the gray afternoon. The apartment felt different now, not haunted but occupied by a history he had inherited without the key to read it. Adrian had known about the door. Adrian had removed a latch, sealed the frame, tried to make the door ordinary again, and he had failed or stopped trying because the door had opened for him at 3:17 just the same, right up until the night it opened and he did not close it. He wrote in the notebook, Adrian removed a latch. Adrian sealed the door. Adrian died at 3:17. Adrian left a note, never follow yourself, for facts, one pattern he could not yet see. That evening, he stood in the hallway and rested his hand on the storage door knob. It was cool, ordinary, the kind of door that should hold only a vacuum and a box of someone's old life. He thought of Adrian standing exactly here, doing exactly this, and felt for the first time not resentment but a tentative, unwilling kinship. The sense of a brother who had stood at the same threshold and been afraid of the same thing. The vision of the burning documents came on the 38th night, and it was the first that felt like a warning rather than a window. Ethan entered the corridor and found the living room in disarray, not the peaceful future living room, but a chaotic present-tense version where someone was feeding papers into the fireplace. The someone was Adrian. Younger Adrian, perhaps 30, his face set in the grim concentration of a person destroying evidence they wish had never existed. The fire popped and threw orange light across the walls, and for a horrible second Ethan thought he saw, among the curling pages, a photograph of himself, a much younger Ethan, squinting at a birthday candle before the flame took it. On the floor, a manila envelope marked with Ethan's name. Adrian hesitated over it, then fed it to the flames too. Ethan stepped forward. Adrian, don't. Adrian did not hear him. The corridor did not permit sound to cross that way. Ethan was a viewer, not a participant, and the reminder stung. He watched the envelope curl and blacken. A photograph slipped free before the fire took it. A woman holding a child, the same dark-haired woman from the kitchen, older now, the child perhaps the boy from the front door vision. So the woman and the child were connected. The envelope was Ethan's. Adrian had destroyed something meant for Ethan. In the morning, Ethan tore the apartment apart looking for the envelope. He found no manila envelope, no photograph. But in Adrian's drawer, the one he had avoided, he found a singed corner of paper with his name on it, and a date. The year Adrian turned 30, 12 years before his death. Adrian had been destroying Ethan's things decades before he died. The betrayal, if that's what it was older than Ethan had imagined. Or it was protection, and Ethan simply could not yet tell which. He sat on the floor of the bedroom holding the singed corner and felt, for the first time, not anger but grief. A grief that predated the estrangement. A grief for a brother who had been trying to manage something neither of them had words for. The burning vision had shown him Adrian as a man at war with his own love, feeding their history to the fire to keep it from becoming a future he feared. It was not a confession of hatred. It was a confession of panic. And that, Ethan realized, was worse, because panic you could forgive, where hatred you could only mourn. He placed the singed corner in the notebook, between 2 pages, the way you press a flower, to keep the evidence of a thing that had already turned to ash. The older Ethan returned on the 41st night, and this time Ethan stayed long enough to talk. The living room was the same warm version apartment. The older man sat in the chair by the reading lamp, the chair Ethan did not own, and looked up as Ethan entered, unsurprised, as if he had been expecting him for years and had long since stopped being startled by his own youth walking through the door. "You keep coming back," the older Ethan said. "I did too at your age, it doesn't help." "Are you the future?" Ethan asked. His voice was steadier than he felt. He had rehearsed the question in the real apartment during the daylight hours when the door was only a closet, and had still not managed to ask it without the small tremor he heard now. The older man considered this the way a person considers a question they have been asked many times, with patience and a trace of weariness, and none of the defensiveness Ethan would have shown in his place. "I'm a consequence," he said. "The door shows consequences, organized around decisions. You keep reading me as a prophecy. I'm not a prophecy. I'm a bill coming due." "For what?" "For choices you haven't made yet. Some of what you've seen, the woman, the child, the empty apartment, those aren't one future. They're branches. The door shows you branches, and you, being you, have been treating branches like a map." Ethan felt the floor tilt. The child, the woman, the empty stripped apartment, all branches, not destinies. The relief was immediate and then immediately suspicious. If they were only branches, then nothing he had seen was certain. Which meant the worst of it, the empty apartment, the loss, might not happen. And the best of it, the child, the woman, the life he had failed to build, might. "Then what's the point of seeing them?" Ethan asked. "To learn the shape of your own fear," the older man said. "You're afraid of the empty apartment. You've been afraid of it since your marriage ended. The door shows it to you because you're already looking for it. It's not telling you what will happen. It's showing you what you're already afraid of. That's the difference. And it's everything." "Adrian." Adrian saw a branch too. He tried to cut it. That's why you're angry at him. He cut a branch that had you in it. He pushed you away to keep you off a path he'd seen. He was wrong to do it, but he wasn't heartless. He was scared, the way you're scared right now, standing in a hallway at 3:17 because you can't stop needing to know. The warm light began to fold. The older Ethan raised a hand, not in farewell but in warning. "Adrian knew this," he said. "He saw a branch too, and he tried to cut it. That's why you're angry at him. He cut a branch that had you in it." Then the corridor closed, and Ethan was in his hallway, and the storage door was an inch open, and his hand was, again, steady. He wrote in the notebook with a hand that was not steady at all. "The future is not fixed. The door shows branches. Adrian saw a branch. Adrian cut it. That is the betrayal, or the love, I cannot tell yet. And then beneath it, in smaller writing, the door shows what I'm already afraid of. So what have I been teaching it to show me?" For a stretch of nights, Ethan convinced himself the simplest explanation was right after all. He was being drugged. The evidence was circumstantial but persistent. He found twice a faint chemical taste in his morning water. The apartment's filter was old. Someone could have accessed it. A former colleague, a man Ethan had reported for falsifying models, who had been fired and had, Ethan knew, resented him, lived in the city. The man had the means, the motive, and the pettiness. The theory fit the shape of a grudge. A slow, patient campaign to unhinge the person who had ended his career. Ethan bought a hidden camera. He set it on the kitchen shelf, angled at the water filter and the hallway. He watched the footage every morning with the grim focus of a man reviewing evidence against himself. The footage showed nothing. No intruder. No tampering. Only Ethan at 3:17 getting up and walking to the hallway as if sleepwalking, but he was awake. He knew he was awake, and the camera caught his eyes open, his gait deliberate, the set of his shoulders that meant he was going somewhere on purpose. The sleepwalking theory died next. He was not sleepwalking. He was choosing to go to the door every night because he could not stop needing to know. The need had a name he had not yet spoken. It was the same need that had ended his marriage, the need to solve the variable before it solved him, to model the future before it arrived. The door was just the most literal version of a habit he had always had. The drugging theory died when the hidden camera, on the night he forgot to recharge it, still captured the storage door opening at 3:17 with no one near it, opening from the inside, the way a door opens when something on the other side steps away. That footage, which he watched 11 times, ended the false leads. He was not mad. He was not drugged. He was not sleepwalking. The door was real, and it opened at 3:17, and Adrian had known, and the only question left was the one Adrian's note had posed: why never follow yourself? He deleted the footage, not from fear, but because keeping it felt like feeding the obsession the older Ethan had warned him about. The camera, the water tests, the theories, they had been ways of avoiding the simpler truth, which was that he had been looking for an external cause because the internal one was harder to face. He wanted the door to be real, because a real door meant a real reason his brother had left. He learned the woman's name by accident, and the accident was the corridor's own doing. On the 47th night, the kitchen scene returned, and this time the woman was not alone. A second person sat across from her, a man Ethan recognized with a jolt. It was Adrian, younger, the age he had been in the burning documents vision. The woman said clearly, "Lena, then. If Lena asks, we say the envelope was lost." And Adrian nodded. Lena. Ethan spent the next day searching. Lena Voss, as it turned out, was a name in Adrian's phone, one he had dismissed as a colleague. He found her number, called it, and a woman's wary voice answered. He identified himself as Adrian's brother. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that comes before a person decides whether to hang up or to finally say the thing they have carried. Then, Adrian said you might call, eventually. Lena Voss was the woman from the kitchen. She had been Adrian's partner briefly more than a decade before the estrangement, before Ethan knew anything was wrong. She had left, she said, because Adrian had changed. He got afraid of the future, she said. Not in a normal way, in a way that made him do things. He destroyed things. He said he was protecting people. He wouldn't say from what. Did he ever mention a child? Ethan asked. Another silence. He could hear through the phone the small sounds of another life being lived, a kettle, a television low in another room, the ordinary noise of a person who had moved on and been allowed to. A boy. He thought he believed the boy was in danger because of something he'd seen. He was wrong about a lot, Ethan, but he loved that boy, in his own broken way. The child from the front door vision. Adrian's child. Ethan's nephew. A boy Ethan had never met, connected to the apartment, to Lena, to the envelope Adrian had burned. Ethan understood then a piece of the pattern. Adrian had seen a branch, a future in which the boy came to harm, and had tried to cut it by destroying the connections that led to it. The envelope, the documents, the relationship with Lena, and eventually the relationship with Ethan himself. Adrian's love had expressed itself as erasure. It had been disastrous. It had been, in its way, understandable. The woman he had wept over in the kitchen, the woman whose name the corridor had finally spoken, was not a stranger at all. She was the mother of Adrian's son, the person Adrian had both loved and pushed away, the living proof that the branch Adrian feared had already partly come true, and that the boy had survived it. Lena's role had changed completely in Ethan's mind, from mystery to family, from ghost to kin. "Why didn't he tell me?" Ethan asked. "Because you were part of what he was afraid of," Lena said gently. "He saw a branch where you and he were estranged forever. He tried to prevent it by pulling away first. People do that. They abandon the thing to save it. He talked about you all the time, you know, even at the end. He was proud of you. He just couldn't figure out how to be proud and afraid at the same time." Ethan hung up and sat in the quiet apartment. The brother he had resented had been afraid for him. The brother he had buried angry had been trying, clumsily and destructively, to protect him from a future he had seen behind the door. The anger did not vanish, but it moved from Adrian to the situation, from blame to grief, the way a river moves when the ground beneath it shifts. He thought of the photograph in Adrian's drawer, the two brothers at the lake, both laughing, and for the first time since the inheritance he could look at it without feeling the crack between them. The crack was still there, but now he understood it had been Adrian's fear, not Adrian's indifference, that had opened it. The twist came on the 52nd night, and it rearranged everything Ethan thought he knew. He entered the corridor and found not a room but a recording, a memory rendered as if he stood inside it. Adrian, at the age the burning document's vision had shown, sitting at this very kitchen table, speaking into a small device Ethan recognized from the hidden panel. A voice recorder, Adrian's, the one Ethan had found but never played. "I'm leaving this for Ethan," Adrian said to the recorder. "If you're hearing it, you found the door. I'm sorry for all of it." Adrian's voice was tired, younger than Ethan remembered, weighed down by something heavier than grief. "I used the door for 2 years before you. I saw branches. I saw a future where you and I never spoke again, where I destroyed something of yours and you never forgave me. I saw the boy. I saw Lena leave. I tried to cut those branches. I burned the envelope. I pushed you away so the angry branch wouldn't grow. I was wrong. Cutting branches doesn't stop the tree. It just makes you alone in the orchard." Adrian laughed, a short, bitter sound. "The worst part is I saw a branch where you find the door and you become like me. Obsessed, following yourself, living for the visions. And I left you the note, never follow yourself, because I couldn't bear to think of you ending up alone in a hallway at 3:17, same as me." He paused. The recorder caught a long breath. "I'm not innocent, Ethan. I hurt you to save you, and hurting you was still hurting you. I don't get forgiven for the motive. I just want you to know the motive existed. The door shows consequences. I became a consequence of my own fear. Don't. That's the whole message. Don't become me." The recording ended. The corridor held for a moment longer, long enough for Ethan to see, on the table beside the recorder, the brass key with the blue tag, the same one that had crossed the threshold into his real hallway weeks before. He picked it up. It was warm, as if it had just been set down. On the tag, in Adrian's hand, "For the door you stop opening." Ethan laughed once, a sound without humor, the laugh of a man who has been understood by the person he thought had abandoned him. The key did not fit any lock he knew. It was, he understood, not a key to the door. It was a key to the decision, the physical proof that Adrian had anticipated exactly this moment, the moment when Ethan would choose to stop, and had left him a small, honest gift for it. Adrian had used the door. Adrian had seen branches. Adrian had tried to control the future and had damaged the present doing it. The estrangement Ethan had blamed on Adrian's abandonment was, in part, Adrian's attempt at protection, a protection that had become the very wound it meant to prevent. Adrian had seen a branch where he and Ethan were estranged forever, and had tried to prevent it by pulling away first, the way a person might step off a cliff to avoid being pushed. The logic was broken. The love was not. And the older Ethan was not a prophecy. He was a warning Adrian had already lived. Ethan stood in the corridor and understood, finally, that the door had never been about the future. It had been about Adrian, about what a man will do to the people he loves when he believes he can see what's coming, about how love, unexamined, becomes control, about how the most dangerous future is the one you build to avoid another. He did not feel exonerated. He felt bereaved all over again, for the brother who had been scared and wrong and his. The anger that had carried him through the estrangement, the anger that had been a kind of armor against grief, drained out of him and left him standing in a borrowed living room holding a warm key, finally helpless in front of the simplest truth. Adrian had loved him badly and was gone, and there was no door, however strange, that would let Ethan redo the part where he had let the silence win. He stepped back through the corridor. The warm light folded. The storage door became a closet. He closed it, and this time his hand was not steady, it shook, the small, honest shaking of a man who has just buried his brother a second time and meant to. The days after the recording were the hardest. Ethan stopped going to the door. Not because he was forbidden, Adrian's note was advice, not law, but because the older Ethan's warning had finally landed. The danger was not the door. The danger was organizing his life around it. But stopping was not simple. The 3:17 waking persisted. His body remembered the hour. He would lie awake or get up and make tea and feel the pull of the hallway like a held breath. On the third night of not opening it, he found himself standing at the door with his hand on the knob, not remembering having walked there. The obsession, he learned, did not exit quietly. It left the way a habit leaves, in increments, with relapses, with the same hand reaching for the same knob before the mind had agreed. He began instead to live outward. He called Lena again and then a third time and learned about the boy, Adrian's son, named Theo, living with Lena 2 cities over, healthy, ordinary, unaware that his uncle existed. Ethan did not rush to meet him. He simply let the knowledge exist. A nephew alive, not in danger, not a branch to be cut, but a person to be known in his own time. He told Lena he would like to know Theo someday when it was right for the boy. She said that sounded like the kind of thing Adrian would have wanted and been unable to ask for. He repaired the relationship with Mark, who had retreated during the drugging phase. He apologized for the secrecy, for the weeks of half-truths, for the way fear had made him a worse friend. Mark, unsurprised and unmovable in his loyalty, accepted with a single sentence, "You're still weird, but you're my weird." Ethan laughed, and the laughter felt like a small repair to a thing he had not known was broken. He sorted Adrian's drawer, the one he had avoided, and found, beneath the singed envelope corner, a small wooden boat Adrian had carved as a boy, and a photograph of the 2 brothers at a lake, Ethan maybe 6, Adrian 18, both laughing. He put the photograph on the shelf by the reading lamp. Not the lamp from the vision. His own lamp. A real choice in a real room. The boat he set on the windowsill, where the afternoon light caught its worn hull, and he found that looking at it did not hurt. It was a small thing a dead brother had made with his hands, and it was allowed to simply be that. He ran his thumb along the hull's rough edge and thought of Adrian at 12, whittling, serious, the way he had been serious about everything, fixing, building, trying. The boat had outlasted the man. That, too, was a kind of consequence the door had not shown him. Not every branch of a life is a warning. Some are just a boat on a sill, still here. And he wrote Adrian a letter he would never send. "I understand," he wrote. "Not all of it. Not the part where you hurt me to save me, but the part where you were scared. I was scared too, you know. I just didn't have a door to blame it on." He folded the letter and put it in the box with Adrian's things beside the boat. It was not closure. It was a sentence set down, the way you set down a heavy object to prove to yourself you can. The decision formed slowly, the way decisions do when they are not decisions at all but the quiet settling of a question that has exhausted itself. He would stop using the door. Not because the mystery was solved. It wasn't, not fully, and perhaps could not be, but because solving it was no longer the point. The point was the life on this side of the door, which had been waiting, undramatic and repairable, the whole time he had been staring through a seam in the wall. On the 63rd night, the door opened one final time. Ethan had not planned to go. He had been asleep, a real sleep, the first in weeks, and woke at 3:17 to the familiar click. He lay in the dark and listened to the hallway settle. He could feel the pull, the old gravitational need to know, the same pull that had carried him through the seam a dozen times. It was weaker now, but not gone. Grief does not leave when you decide it should. It waits in the body's habits. He got up. He walked the corridor. He stood before the storage door, an inch open, the warm light breathing beyond it. He did not open it further. He had expected to feel something grander, a final revelation, a cinematic closure, the kind of ending the corridor had always withheld. Instead, he felt mostly tired and quietly certain, the way a person feels when they have decided to leave a party that has gone on too long. The door had shown him everything except the one thing he needed, which was himself choosing. And that, he understood now, was the point of the whole apparatus. Not to show him the future, but to bring him to the threshold of it and let him decide whether to step through. Instead, he spoke to the door, to the corridor, to the brother who had loved him badly and meant well. "I understand. I'm not following you. I'm staying here." The words sounded strange in the dark hallway, not grand, not resolved, just true, the way a person says "I'm home" without thinking it is profound. He was not performing for the door. He was telling it, the way you tell a habit you are done with it, that the arrangement had ended. From the other side came a sound he had never heard before, not the door settling, not a draft, a voice. His own voice. Older, weary, at peace in a way the present Ethan could not yet be, the peace of a man who has stopped fighting a thing and made a truce with it. It said only, "You finally understood." Then the warm light folded, the way it always did, and the corridor closed, and the storage door became a closet again. Shelves, vacuum, the box of Adrian's things, the dust and old carpet. Ordinary. Ethan closed it. His hand was steady. He went back to bed and, for the first time since the 19th night, slept until morning. A deep, unguarded sleep. The kind he had not known he had lost until he found it again, like a man who had been wearing shoes 2 sizes too small and finally takes them off. When he woke, the light through the window was the ordinary gray of a weekday, and the apartment was quiet in the way only an apartment without a seam in its wall can be quiet. He lay for a while and listened for the click. It did not come. The hour had passed, or he had passed it, or both. He did not analyze which. Some thresholds, once crossed, do not require you to look back at the door. The next morning, the closet was normal. Ethan opened it to be sure. Shelves, vacuum, box, dust. No corridor, no warm light, no older self waiting with a warning. The door had given him its last visit, or he had taken his last, and either way it was finished. He began slowly to live the life that was actually his. He called Lena and arranged, cautiously, to meet Theo someday, not to claim him but to be known. He kept Adrian's photograph on the shelf. He learned from Mrs. Acaffer that the building's strange hours had a boring explanation after all. The boiler kicked on at 3:17. A small pressure change that had, in Adrian's time and his, announced the hour to anyone listening in the dark. The door's timing, it turned out, had a mechanical root, the boiler, the old building, the apartment's particular bones. Adrian had discovered the latch, removed it, sealed the frame, and still the hour had come, because you cannot seal a building's own rhythm. Ethan found that almost funny. The mystery had had a plumbing explanation all along, underneath the mystery. Adrian had known that too. Several days later, clearing the last of Adrian's things, Ethan found the watch. It was Adrian's old watch, the one he had worn every day, a cheap digital thing with a cracked face and a band gone soft with years. Ethan remembered it from childhood, Adrian checking it obsessively, the way anxious people check the time, as if the hour might confess something if examined often enough. He had last seen it on Adrian's wrist in the photographs from the hospital, and had assumed it was buried with him, or lost. It had been in the box all along, at the bottom, beneath the boat and the letter. The watch had stopped. The time on its dead display was 3:18 a.m. Not 3:17. Ethan sat with it in his palm. The plastic was warm from his hand. Every official record, the death certificate, the police report, the coroner's note, had said 3:17. Adrian had died at 3:17 according to the world that processed his death. But the watch he had been wearing, the watch that had stopped the moment his heart did, said 3:18. 1 minute. Adrian had died a minute after the door's hour. Or the door's hour had come a minute before he died. Ethan would never know which, and the watch would never tell him. The discrepancy was small, almost nothing, a single minute, the length of a held breath, and yet it sat in his hand like a question the size of a life. what had happened in that single minute between 3:17 and 3:18 that the records and the wrist disagreed about. Had Adrian in that minute opened the door one last time? Had he stepped through or chosen not to? Had the corridor shown him something that the stopped watch had recorded and the world had not? He turned the watch over. On the back, in Adrian's cramped hand, a single word had been etched into the plastic with something sharp: wait, or perhaps water. The engraving was too worn to read with certainty. Ethan smiled, a small, sad, unwilling smile. His brother had left him one last unreadable mark, one last thing to wonder about, and perhaps that too was a kind of love. He did not try to answer the question. He put the watch in the box with Adrian's things, beside the carved boat and the photograph and the unsent letter. He did not open the door again. Outside, the city woke. Inside, the apartment was ordinary and repaired and his. Ethan Cole, 43, actuary, brother, uncle not yet known, stood in a hallway with no corridor behind its door, and chose deliberately to stay on the side of the world where the future was still unwritten. That was the whole lesson, not to see the future, to choose it one ordinary morning at a time in a room with no seam in the wall, with a dead brother's watch in a box and a living nephew in another city and a friend who called him weird. The door had shown him branches. The life he kept was the trunk, and the trunk, it turned out, was enough. The door that only opened at 3:17 a.m., an original audiobook by Mindshift Library.